Hello and welcome to a very special presentation for NCS Fest Online. My name is Jason Chatfield. I'm the president of the National Cartoonist Society. And with me today is the very talented Tom Fishburne. Tom is a cartoonist based in California. I am going to read you his bio because I can't remember. He has so many achievements that I could not memorize them. So here we go. Tom started drawing cartoons, like many of us, on the backs of his business cases as a student at Harvard Business School. Tom's cartoons have grown by word of mouth to reach hundreds of thousands of marketers every single week and have been featured by the Wall Street Journal, the Fast Company, and the New York Times. Tom is the founder of Cartoonist, a marketing agency focused on the unique medium of cartoons. Since 2010, Cartoonist has developed visual content marketing with a sense of humor for businesses such as Google, IBM, Kronos, and LinkedIn. Tom draws literally and figuratively from 20 years in the marketing trenches in the US and Europe. He was marketing VP at Method Products, interim CMO at Hotel Tonight, and worked in brand management for Nestle and General Mills. Tom developed websites and digital campaigns for interactive agency IXL in the late 90s and worked on the first English language magazine in Prague. Tom is a frequent keynote speaker on marketing, innovation, and creativity using cartoons, case studies, and his marketing career to tell the story visually. He lives and draws near San Francisco with his wife and two daughters. Tom, welcome to NCS Fest Online.
Thank you so much. It's such a treat to be here.
Of course. Wow, what an intro. Now, the one thing that I didn't mention in your intro that I want to ask you about, because it's only just come to my attention, is that you were a cartoonist in residence at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. You got to tell me about that. That sounds incredible.
That was a wonderful experience. Well, I came across these two professors who were developing the first course at Stanford Business School that's all about humor in business, and they were developing a lot of research into how humor is this underleveraged skill in business. And I reached out to them, and they knew my work, and they said, "Well, the next course we'd love to have you sit in. We'd love to have you be our cartoonist in residence." So I got to sit there for the whole semester and draw cartoons throughout the course, and I even got to guest lecture a class, which was great fun.
That is really, really cool. Wow. Cartoonists lecturing at business schools is something really just,
where is the world headed?
Yeah, exactly. If there were any other signs that we were heading towards the apocalypse. Now, of course, this is an online session. We're both in quarantine. You more so than me at this point in California. So we would have loved to have had you in person at the Rubens, but this is the digital equivalent. And the conversation today, we're really hoping to cover a lot of different topics. So I do want to dive right in. But before I do, I do want to ask you, as far as this current circumstance that we are in, you have built a business within Cartoonists that is very adaptive. It's very malleable, I suppose, to change and to this kind of circumstances that we're in with the coronavirus pandemic. Can you speak a little bit to how you built your business, going all the way back to when you were drawing cartoons in your cubicle at General Mills, and to the point that today it is where it is and what it is, and how you built it from the ground up?
Yeah, happy to. It's a lot of trial and error. I'd like to think I had a bigger plan getting started, but it was a lot of serendipity kind of along the way,
right.
And ended up what it is today ultimately is a lot of different pieces that sort of come together. But I started, drawing cartoons really on the side. I was a student at first, and then I had day jobs, and I was just drawing cartoons nights and weekends, which I had a full-time day job drawing cartoons for about 8 years before I ever started making any money from it. So it was really a hobby and a labor of love. And I would occasionally do paid things during that 8-year period, but it was never with the idea that it would be what I did full time. I dreamed of that. I just didn't think it was possible. And in some ways, that 8 years let me be patient with it and not try to force anything. I knew right away that some of the traditional business models of cartooning were getting increasingly challenged. And so I wasn't sure if there would be a way to make kind of a living at it or money at all, really. But I started to get these requests asking me to create custom things, and I'd experiment with those, and I'd play with pricing and that kind of thing. And I eventually got to a point where I was able to build up a small stable of clients on the side who were paying me to create commissioned cartoons. And that's about 2/3 of what I do, creating commissioned cartoons, mostly for business. The most of that is for these companies' own marketing campaigns. But I've started to do a lot of work with companies internally when they're trying to do some sort of culture change. They basically hire me to come in and research their company and then make fun of them and some of the behaviors they're trying to move away from, and using cartoons as kind of a teaching aid. And then I've started to do a lot of work with companies for thought leadership type stuff. If they have a lot of research they've been doing and it's kind of dry, cartoons can kind of help bring that to life a little bit. So kind of 2/3 has evolved into this custom cartoon work. And because my background's in marketing, I really pitch it less as a series of cartoons and more as, here's a campaign, here's a communication challenge you have, and here's how, I can help. And it happens to use cartoons. It's a bit of a head fake that lets me kind of sell what I do, but then ultimately what I do is a lot of time at the drafting table, which is great. And then about 1/3 over time, I didn't expect this when I finally left my day job to do this full time. About 1/3 of what I do and get paid for involves paid speaking at events. Which obviously is changing a lot right now,
Yeah.
but that's turned into a big part of it. And then the other part over time, because I've been drawing a cartoon every week about marketing for almost 20 years now, it's quite a big repository of cartoons about marketing. And so I've built up a licensing engine on the website that just makes it really easy for people to license cartoons for presentations or websites or books or whatever, and that's kind of added a little bit. So it's I've kind of cobbled together a couple of ways to get paid drawing cartoons, and I'm always open to new ways as well. And and as things evolve, I think so much has changing. Like things are kind of coming up all the time, and so that's been part of the fun of it.
That's what's really interesting to me about your business and your entire ethos, really, and that's why I wanted to speak with you today. Was the ability to kind of identify trends, but then also not be too much of a generalist. So despite the fact that you do have all of these separate income streams from taking commissions and licensing cartoons and doing speaking, which are really important things for a freelancer to have, various income streams, you really have found a niche. And that sort of old idiom of, write what you know. Find the thing that you're most interested in and try and make a living doing that thing. I feel like you've married your MBA at Harvard and your cartooning into this amazing amalgam of what has become. I mean, I don't know that anyone could challenge you on the niche of marketing cartoons. I mean, that is the specialty that you've chosen. And by doing so, in finding that niche, you've really carved out a unique voice for yourself, and one of authority. So you actually know what you're parodying because you're so intimately familiar with it that you know how to tear it to shreds. Is that something, as far as giving advice to upcoming cartoonists, as well as established cartoonists who are looking to maybe specialize or find a niche and explore these sort of newer ways of making an income on cartooning with things like licensing and commissions, specialized commissions, where would you think they would best begin to find that kind of niche, to kind of explore that voice?
It's a great question. I wasn't quite so strategic about it. It was a little bit accidental at first because that's what my day job was. And I was kind of, I was just surrounded by these inside jokes and things that were happening in the companies where I worked. And there was just so much material to make fun at in that. And so it started with just me drawing what I like to draw and about my day job. And the serendipitous part turned out to be creating a cartoon for marketers ended up being a nice link because marketers have marketing budgets and they have communication challenges. So that kind of link sort of made sense. But it started over time. I've started to think that really any type of creative work, it's important to think about what you uniquely do.
Yeah.
And because that uniqueness and focusing on a niche is what can allow you to establish a name for yourself. And then when people want to hire you or your work gets out into the world, you're kind of onto a subset of yourself. A friend of mine described it as the power of combinatory skills, that you have other skills in your background
Right.
and you add cartooning to it. And that hybrid is really, interesting.
Yeah.
For you, like a stand-up speaker and a cartoonist, like that's a really cool hybrid, for example.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I feel like there's a few different things you can bolt on that makes makes anyone, a cartoonist, uniquely them. That when you play to that, then it's more satisfying for yourself, because you're not just trying to mimic another cartoonist who happens to be successful, but you're finding what your own voice is. But then also, I find whenever a client wants to work with me, they're typically not thinking we're talking to you and we're talking to 5 other cartoonists. They're talking, because of their specific niche. They're kind of just like, oh, we want to work with that person that. And so I feel like I think there's room for any cartoonist to think about what it is that they uniquely do. And the other thing is, and then where that gets you too is that too often when everyone sort of sounds alike, which is the risk. When I started thinking about this, I got the Graphic Artists Guild's book on like how do you value a cartoon, and it was super helpful. But by putting a standardized price list of sorts, it kind of marks everything to price. And then, if everyone sounds kind of too similar, then you're just competing on price and it's a race to the bottom. And so I try to think part of the value of finding what you uniquely do is you can add more, you can convey more value for your work, and then people value it more. That's kind of, over time, I've realized that's been helpful for me to remember that and just really hold fast to this little niche. In marketing.
And you've done it very well, and your website. I would encourage anyone to go and visit Marketoonist. You're the first thing that comes up, obviously, when you Google Marketoonist. But the way that you have structured it as well, to make it easy for people who are actually looking for cartoons on specific topics. You've used tags really well. We at NCS Fest last year in California, we had the cartoon collections, cartoonists and I guess the team behind that, and that is I guess that's a team. That's a business. Whereas you are a company of one. You are, to quote, you are actually in the first chapter of the New York Times best-selling book, Company of One, by Paul Jarvis. And it is an interesting thing to see someone do that as just a single cartoonist, as a single person, and as a freelance business, because you don't have the support necessarily of a team within you. And when you are outsourcing things to other contractors and other freelancers and perhaps other cartoonists, you're sort of closing the loop. You're not sort of having to worry about salaries and leave and all that sort of stuff and healthcare. You're very deliberately farming things out and delegating to people to whom you can trust and who won't damage the reputation of your brand. I think that's a really interesting distinction between what you're doing and what cartoon collections are doing, because you both in both sections, it's very easy to find as someone who's looking for a cartoon to find exactly what you're looking for. And I will plug your book as well. This is a fantastic book. Your Ad Ignored Here, which is a great title for a marketing book. I know that everyone is dying to see some of your work, so I know that you've prepared some cartoons for today, and many of them are apropos of the situation we're in here. A lot of them are quite recent, and part of your weekly cartoon. Do you want to talk us through this first one?
Yeah, happy to. So I just have a small selection of cartoons. A few of these are recent ones, just in the time of COVID. So this one is some people on a skyscraper, having a meeting. Digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change anytime soon. And then this big COVID wrecking ball.
My stomach sank when I saw this one.
I feel like I don't know. I feel like sometimes usually when I think about humor, it starts with some sort of pain point. It's just painful. A recognition of some pain point that I'm feeling. And this one, I definitely have heard from people resonate. I think we all kind of experience that pain point at the same time.
Who was it who said, a tragedy is when I cut my finger, comedy is when I fall into a sewer and die? Was that Mel Brooks, maybe?
I love that. I think it might be Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
I love that. A lot of the cartoonists in the Burnt Toast gang have that sort of similar. They're constantly using humor to overcome, any sort of bad sort of event that happens in life. And you and I
Yeah.
have spoken about this, that the ability to try and sensitively sort of, I guess it's something of a tightrope, towing that line between being inappropriate and being tastefully funny in a time like this, where you are actually able to use humor to without dismissing the importance of things, or being insensitive. You are actually able to use humor, and I know that you've done talks on this that can be found on your website, but it is a very specific skill, and it takes a lot of practice to know where that line is. Did you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it is. It is a tightrope. Well, it's funny because I don't know. I found, in this wrecking ball time, and here's another cartoon about the new normal, which is one of those expressions
That's
that
so great.
um, we're all going through this thing together, and particularly because I do a lot of work with brands, they're so sensitive to the right tone, how they sound, and so there was this kind of vibe that suddenly went out that it's better to be too serious than sorry, and so suddenly all the brands kind of sound alike, and so I actually think that's a bit of a miss, because I feel like that's the easy path. But people are looking for humor because they want to make sense of what's going on right now. And if every brand sounds alike, what a dull world that is.
Yeah.
And so I've tried to find ways to explain, a Zoom. Should we schedule the next Zoom meeting, or just hit ourselves repeatedly in the head with a hammer?
This is very real. This is.
And I found it's when we're all going through something collectively, humor is an ideal way to talk about this kind of stuff, because there's so much absurdity in the situation.
Especially when there's a solidarity to it, I think, as well. When we're all, I guess I don't remember a time, certainly in my lifetime, but just historically, when everyone was going through the same thing at the same time at such a scale. It's like a world war. And there are things that we can all appreciate, and kind of, poke fun at without undermining the gravity of the situation. This is a perfect example. It's great. And it really, the feeling of, the constant Zoom meetings. Also, you mentioned everyone pulling from the same hymn book, really, and quite literally copying and pasting the, we all appreciate you at this time, the importance of this situation,
Yeah, I think I did. So I did a cartoon. So some brand we apparently gave an email address to 3 or 4 years ago wants us to know they're here for us in this difficult time. And I found there's some YouTuber out there who spliced together all these ads from brands talking about "we're here for you, we're here for you," and they all look identical. The same piano music, the somber tones.
It's like a template.
It is. There's a woman who tweeted this funny poem. The first lines of emails I've received while quarantining, and it's every line, in these uncertain times as we navigate the new normal, et cetera, and it's all that stuff. And so I like, that's definitely something I noticed when all this happened. Is like, God, we need more humor now more than ever, and it's just getting lost, and it's missing. But there's room for for brands or for anyone to find that humor. And cartoonists, like you said about the line, we're uniquely positioned to really know what that line is. How do you find humor in situations that can be really difficult? And one of the academic theories I came across, there's a scientist, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he basically identified a bunch of different types of humor. And the one that he talks about in times like this is what he calls affiliative humor, which is we're laughing with ourselves. It's this collective laugh response, which is different than laughing, at somebody or even self-deprecating humor. Like there's that balancing act that I think cartoonists know how to tap into a collective response. And that's what makes me, I don't know, it makes it feel like there's this shared experience. And I sometimes heard, in some of these cartoons that I sent out, I would get a response from people saying, "Oh my God, I like that we're kind of all going through this. At least we can laugh at ourselves."
Yeah. I have the same thing with sort of readers of my cartoons who will either say, "Oh, that's too real," or "Oh my God, that's me." You get a lot of sort of. It's nice when you get the recognition from people, and I'm sure you get so many. I do want to ask you about your mailing list, because you must get so many interesting connections through that, where people really feel like that's something that they look forward to each week, to getting your cartoon. And can you speak to the importance of having an audience like that, and also sort of the voice that you've developed, the voice of your brand, as it were, but also the voice that is sort of authentic. It's not, you're not playing to some kind of playbook that a marketing brand developer has, marketing managers put together. And you're very authentic in the way that you present your work. You're not hiding anything. You're not trying to use any tricks or sales, jargon. It's very direct and it's very authentic. Can you speak a bit about that? Because your mailing list has been going for some time.
It has, and it is the single biggest, most important thing I've ever done.
Yeah,
and it happened kind of accidentally. I was drawing cartoons in business school, and there was a student newspaper, and I graduated and there was no student newspaper anymore. And I was working at General Mills, and it's before social media. So I just set up a simple email newsletter, and I sent it to 35 of my coworkers, kind of in my immediate group, and just said, hey, I've been doing this cartoon in business school. I want to do one explicitly about marketing. If you're interested, sign up. And then that's the only bit of push I ever did for that. And It's now been 18 years.
18 years.
Of sending this cartoon weekly. And it's amazing. And it helped, of course, that when I started, I wasn't trying to make anything out of it. It was just sort of this is how I can communicate. I like drawing cartoons. And I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm not trying to pitch stuff. So I was able, over the first 8 years, to just send out a cartoon a week. And it was just my own diary of sorts. Yeah. So my voice really came out of that. It was just how I felt as a marketer. And then after, I'd say maybe, I guess it was probably 6 or 7 years, it was just the cartoon. And then as social media emerged, I started adding those channels. And then when blogging started becoming popular, that's when I started writing a few hundred words to go along with every cartoon, because I could unpack it. I could have the cartoon be just pure funny and silliness, and hopefully some message. But then I had a little time in the writing part to say, oh, here's an example of a cool brand that's approaching this thing differently, or here's, just unpack it and go a little bit deeper. Yeah. And the interplay between the cartoon and that I started to play with. And that's really, I guess, if there's any voice of sorts, it really comes out of that. And then when I started doing it as my job, I had to restrain myself from wanting to pitch all the time. Yeah. Because, particularly with my audience being marketing people, they have high BS detectors. Of course. And so if I try to do that, I lose it. And so I've really tried to prioritize, it's kind of this sacred relationship I have with this audience, reaching them every week, that they've taken the time to sign up for it. And so I really prioritize that. And I don't let anything get in the way of that. I find that by doing it every week, I try to set it at the same time every week. Yes. People do kind of look forward to it. And if I ever miss a week because I'm sick or on vacation, I do get messages hey, where's your email? I remember it might've been I think it was a quote from Gary Trudeau about his sabbatical and how he described cartooning as a public utility, and people complain when it's not there. Yeah. And that's a unique thing. You think about most forms of communication, all the clutter we're surrounded by, most of us would not complain if we didn't get an email from a brand. but the fact that people want the next installment, there's power in that. And so I've tried to really make that the core of everything. And then, and then I allow myself to show, after I do the cartoon and people read that, beneath it, I can say, hey, here's some cool thing I'm doing, or I'm speaking at this event or whatever. And then people feel it feels like an appropriate balance. That's how I thought about it.
Yeah. It feels very, just as a subscriber, it does feel very respectful, both of the reader's time, but also of their privacy. You're not trying to use, any underhanded marketing tactics or metrics to sort of be creepy about things. But you're also very consistent. And I think with cartoonists, I'm not sure how much of a priority is put on those kinds of relationships, especially, some people say you sort of learn to celebrate the unsubscribes, because it means you've really honed down your tribe, as it were, your readers, your real interested 1,000 true fans, as it were. And
that's right.
You, over the course of, what was it, 18 years?
Yeah, it's been 18 years now.
You must have cultivated a very loyal following.
I feel really fortunate. I love the audience that chooses to tune into the cartoons. I feel really fortunate about that. Yeah. And over time, now that I do this as my business, a lot of those different aspects of how I get paid, they come serendipitously through somebody sending me a note saying, "I've been reading your work for 10 years, and at some point I want to find a way to work with you, and I have this interesting project. I'm not sure if it's what you do.
Mm.
Can we talk about it? And I love that. That makes me so happy.
Well, that brings me to my next question, because this is something that I know a lot of freelancers, particularly right now, are struggling with. And that is what I call the ability to say no. The freelance panic of not knowing where your next paycheck might be coming from, and then sort of accepting every single project that someone throws at you, and then whether you quote it appropriately or not. You always hate getting that email when you quote something and they come back and they go, "Oh, is that all?"
Yeah.
Sort of, I'd really love to get your thoughts on how to cultivate the ability to determine what is your enough. What you seem to have really nailed down, what your upper limit is, so you don't have this exponential growth and constant trying to double the profits every quarter. You've figured out what you need, and you have this fantastic philosophy on, well, I mean, there's diminishing returns if my lifestyle is if I'm constantly pulling all-nighters to get work done. How did you figure out what to say yes to and what to say no to with that torrent of, offers and projects coming in?
Yeah, it's tricky. It helped at first because I was getting these requests while I still had a day job. So I could sort of I wasn't wedded to everything that came in. So that gave me a little bit of a head start, so to speak, because I got used to saying no to things. And and not at first. I mean, kind of my imposter syndrome is so loud. I mean, it's like, oh, here, I'll just do it for free for you. I'll pay you to work with me. That's how loud my imposter syndrome is. So and of course with something, and I think every creative person struggles with this. That's one of the things I love about the NCS is because we can get together and we all share that same freelancer anxiety and the imposter syndrome. And it's and it's really valuable because we can build each other up. And I think the most important thing is gosh, we live in such a cluttered world. If there's ever a time for the power of people who know how to communicate well, it's now. And cartoonists have such a skill there. That's talent that's worth something. And it's important to stand up for that worth and not do things just for exposure, and not to take things to, not to discount yourself. I found that just with me, because whenever I did discount myself to get a project, I always felt bad about it.
Of course. It's drudgery.
Exactly. And so I kind of went in with this MO that I would rather do something else on the side to make money and be valued for my cartooning work than to devalue my cartooning work just because I want to make money doing that. Because it's such a rare gift that we get to do cartooning as a job. It's such a dream. I didn't want to tarnish it. I feel really lucky that I get to do this. I didn't want to, one, to your other point, try to build up this company that's scale and all that focus. I'd worked in businesses like that before, and there's a lot of misery in that. And I didn't want my job to be like, oh, great, I finally got a job drawing cartoons, and now my actual job is being a project manager of other people. I knew that would suck the fun out of it. So I tried to find that balance, like you said, of what's the amount that I need to make as I have a dad with 2 daughters and a wife and a mortgage and all that stuff. What's that threshold that I need to make? And then there's diminishing returns. If you oh my God, I'm going to grow this company, then it becomes a company. So I've really tried to find that balance. We're lucky that we're in a time where a lot of the tools have been democratized. To your point about building up your own licensing engine, a lot of these tools are there, and you can figure it out and then choose what you insource. In my case, I want to insource a lot of the creative work and the pure cartooning, and what you outsource, which is things I don't like to do, like accounting, or things I'm not good at necessarily, like animation. Like those things, I don't have to learn how to do everything myself, and I can be selective about who, the talented people I bring to work with. And I do feel really lucky to work with teams. I love working with other cartoonists.
That's interesting.
But I want to make sure I do it in a way that doesn't tarnish the experience.
Of course.
Ultimately, I want to be a cartoonist, and I want to have time at the drafting table every day.
Yeah. Well, something very unique to our industry, and people who are already within the NCS and within the industry would know this, that cartoonists are unique in that we're not really at each other's throats all the time in a very competitive way. We're very collaborative and we're very collegiate. We don't really consider each other like direct competition, even though if you really boiled it down, I guess we are in some senses. You know,
Well,
there's 16. Sorry, go on.
Oh no, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, like some of the traditional markets, you know, when the New Yorker gets however many submissions every week,
Yeah,
like that is competition. It's down to the 16
sure.
spots in the New Yorker, or when the syndicates choose like what few things they bring in every year. There's competition there, but as far as I think if we widen the lens to all the different places cartooning can go,
Yeah.
and again going back to the point we talked about earlier about finding what you uniquely do,
Yes.
suddenly you're not competing. You're like taking it in a really cool new direction.
Well, you collaborate with other cartoonists. Can you speak a little bit to that? You have sort of some great teams that you work with and great cartoonists, some who are in the NCS.
Yes, I feel very fortunate. So I've experimented over time on ways to do this that work and make sense. And I've kind of compartmentalized a bit of it. This is all for client stuff, by the way, and not for my own kind of marketing cartoon. But there's sort of the idea stage, the gag writing stage, and then there's the illustration stage. And I found it useful. There are a few cartoonists on the gag writing stage. Rob Coddington, who's in Vancouver, and Susan Camilleri Konar, who's an NCS member in Vancouver. I've worked with them quite a bit. And then I've done a lot of work with Michael Jancy, more on the illustration side, creating campaigns or series that are use a different look and feel. Most of the clients I work with, they like my own drawing style, but a lot of times with particularly bigger brands, they're really specific about how the cartoons look, and they like doing different styles. And I have a couple examples of it.
Yeah, I'd love to see some.
I'll skip past a couple of.
I do want to come back to the other cartoons that you have here, but until then, this is
So this is an example. This is one in my own style, but it's a company called Braze. They make software, and it's an example of how a cartoon can illustrate some sort of a pain point. In this case, a literal pain point of a guy on the wheel, and then connecting to a brand message. And this is another software company. Kind of simple gags. These are in my style, and I worked with other cartoonists as part of the gag writing stage. So we would collectively write a whole bunch of gags and pitch those to the client and decide which ones to take forward. And this one was fun because they also built up a dedicated website for the series.
That's great.
Then they even had this way to get a collectible of your favorite cartoon from the series. You get coffee mugs
as a mug.
Yeah, or a mouse pad or whatever. And so that was kind of fun. And then this is something for an executive recruiter, made a whole leadership series. And,
boy, that really that one really hits home right now.
Yeah, and they ended up making that the feature of their homepage when you went to their company website. Like they had this to like delve into humor and leadership issues. So it was kind of a fun way to play with cartoons. But then I have this example. I've done a couple of projects with Dell. Actually, before I get to Dell, actually, this is one for Kronos. We did something fun where we made at a trade show, they set up a green screen environment. So I had a couple cartoons I drew without the characters in it, and people could kind of like stand in a green screen and pose and have themselves in a cartoon. And then all these little cartoons were created with all actual people at the trade show, and then they got an image of themselves in a cartoon that they could then send to people or like distribute. So it's kind of a fun way to think about cartoons within sort of a live event. But yeah, here's the Dell example. One of the Dell examples we've done. We created the incredibly serious sales guide. So this is something they give to all of their sales reps around the world. And we had, this is the cover of it. And then we had a bunch of gags in there. Are you sure this is what we mean by workforce transformation? And these were all illustrated by Michael Jancy.
Yeah,
and,
they look very Jancy-esque, I was going to say.
Yeah,
great.
And worked on team for gags. So I got to, I love Michael's work, and so and all the cartoons I got to work with on the idea conception stage was really fun. And then it became part of this big marketing collateral that got sent out to all the marketing team folks. And so a way that cartoons can make something that's kind of dry, like you're talking about, features and benefits of tech gadgets, and then using cartoons to kind of bring people in. So those are a few examples of what we've done.
That's fantastic.
And here's one example I'll share just quickly. I mentioned earlier doing a lot of internal culture change work. So this is a consulting company that brought me in to look at their own internal culture, and this just went internally as culture change within the company, which is kind of cool.
That is good. It's interesting so that was PricewaterhouseCoopers, was it?
Yeah,
That
exactly.
it's interesting that companies like that use cartoons and humor within the internal, not just external sort of client facing, but actual
Yeah,
internal HR side of things, because I think it would be it must be so much more engaging and enjoyable, and a departure from the dry sort of usual HR training videos and
right.
modules, and God, it can
Well,
be
it
so
also
boring.
and it also shows, I think, it's a good thing for a company because it shows that they don't take themselves too seriously. I feel
Yes.
like if HR is setting the tone, that
Yeah.
it's okay to laugh at ourselves.
Yeah.
Like it kind of deflates the stress in the room of other people feeling comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
I had a funny experience with a bank in Singapore where I was working on a series about their culture, and we started creating these cartoons. And there's one of my favorite stories with this is because it's a bank in Singapore, and so I had to like understand the bank, and
Yes.
I had to understand a little bit like what's funny in Singapore. And I started playing around with this idea. They had I got to interview all these different people in the company, and I noticed that a bunch of people kept using the word scolded when they were worried about what their manager would do to them if they made a
Oh.
mistake, like they would be scolded.
Hmm.
And so I was like, God, that's such a weird word. And so I
Yeah.
played around with a gag involving like the American dunce cap sort of thing. And no one in this bank in Singapore knew what that
Oh, of
was. They were
course.
like,
It's an
"What?
American
Why is
thing.
he wearing that on his head? What is a dunce? What is that?" And so I was like, how like when you're a child in a classroom and you've done something naughty, like what is the stereotypical thing that teachers like force you to do?
Mm.
And it was so funny because I was on this conference call and they started describing like if you get in trouble and you're naughty, they make you go in front of the class and you have to cross your arms and hold under your earlobes, and then you have to squat,
Really?
and you have to hold that position in front of the class. And they started describing that, and they all started laughing because they all knew that reference, which I didn't.
Huh.
And they sent me a picture of this executive posing for me,
Wow.
doing that position, and they all thought it was the funniest thing ever. And then so I created a cartoon based on that,
That's funny.
and
Look at that.
and so that's kind of an example of like within corporate culture environments, like they're all kind of different. And I think that's one thing that have loved starting to do is sort of dropping into a corporate climate, figuring out where some of the humor lies. Some
Yeah.
of the things like the word scolded that they say so often, they don't even notice it's a weird word for a company environment. And I
Mm.
can kind of find a way to bring humor into that situation, which lets them then talk about it with others.
It's so interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, your knowledge of working within the corporate world before you went full time in cartooning, it's sort of you developed this vernacular, you developed this sort of shorthand and understanding of all the buzzwords and all of the different, just the way that people speak in acronyms and things like that. You you just sort of showed an example there of how sometimes the humor doesn't necessarily translate across borders, despite the fact that you
Yeah.
do have very much an international business with your cartoon licensing, and that does sort of travel all over the place. But do you ever find that you do hit a few, sort of roadblocks with humor? How often does that really happen to you?
It comes up. I mean, I think about it a lot,
Yeah,
particularly for a global campaign. I don't deliberately create things for a global campaign that have too American a reference. I
yeah,
try to find generalizable reference points, and it's nice. I guess there is a sense that within business environments, there's more uniformity sometimes than other aspects of the culture in those environments. So that's helped a little bit.
yeah,
But I really have to lean on the company that I'm working with, that it is a collective process. I try to watch that because you don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen. But
yeah.
I do like to, as we share roughs and we're talking about what's resonating, I do try to take it to the next step. Like the dunce cap one, when they didn't get it, it could have been easy for me to just say, "Oh, American reference, I'll take it away."
Right,
But then in having that follow-on conversation, like,
right.
and knowing like the right way to do that, that's really where the humor came from. Actually, my favorite moment is not even the cartoon; it's just having these executives, imagining these executives in a bank,
Yeah,
and one guy is like doing this in the corner of the room. Like, I love that happened.
yeah.
and so, and
Someone took
so
that photo. Yeah.
yeah. And so I try to think about like I'm learning, and I'm really honest. Like, I'm an American. Like, I happen to have worked in Europe, so I
Mm.
have seen some different environments. But it has been really cool to see things pop up and the similarities. I actually have one example that's kind of fun. Let me see. Um, I had a chance, because I travel a lot for speaking. I had a chance
Mm.
to go to
Oh, wow.
India last year, and the event where I spoke in India, they ended up making a billboard campaign leading up to the event, and they used my cartoons. So it's like I got to go to Mumbai for the first time, and
wow.
like my cartoons are on billboards there, which is really cool to see that there's some universal types of things that everyone can find some humor in,
Yeah.
and then there are cultural nuances I try to be mindful of, and then occasionally we'll actually translate cartoons. Like in some ways, cartooning is easier to make global than like a photograph, because a photograph, it's so photorealistic. You're like, oh, that's clearly in this place. But with a cartoon, if it's drawn simply enough, you can, I think the viewer of the cartoon puts themselves a little bit into it,
Yeah.
and they can, and it can go further, I think, than other types of like visual media, for instance, which is kind of cool.
I remember during the Arab Spring, in Tahrir Square, they had spray painted cartoons because there were so many of the population who were illiterate, who wouldn't be able to read, slogans and taglines and protests, and it was all cartoons, and it was in Tunisia and all over the place. It was cartoonists who were making not, it's not propaganda. It's not the right word. I guess the visuals for the uprising were very much all cartoons because they were just immediately understandable without a single word written.
That's right. It's so powerful. Actually, in India, funny enough, the longest running ad campaign in India is a cartoon. It's for a dairy brand called Amul Dairy, and every week for literally the last 60 years, they've put out a new cartoon starring this character in a cartoon situation relating to a dairy brand once a week.
Every week?
Every week. Gosh. And it was there when and they touch on a lot of topical things. Like I've researched a little bit their cartoon studio process, and it is like, a rip from the headlines, like what's happening in the world right now. How do we create a cartoon based on that, and then suddenly put it on billboard ads across India? But I love that example.
So interesting. Well, I mean, they've accrued however many years worth of cartoons now. I mean, that could become it's such an incredible.
I bought they've published book collections of them. I bought their book collection.
Wow.
And whenever I meet somebody from India, I mention that example, and it's the awareness level is so high.
The ubiquity of it. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Which I think is, again, the power of cartoons. And I feel like that's I get excited about the potential of where cartoons can go, because have you ever come across the story of Johnston and Cushing by any chance?
It rings a bell. Did you want to kind of elaborate?
Yeah, and I don't want to take too much on it, but so for like a 20-year period, it was an ad agency in New York that was explicitly focused on cartoons in marketing communication.
Right. And
Milton Caniff, who's one of the founders of the NCS, was one of their cartoonists. Dick Brown was another one. And like the idea of like having literally that much funneling cartooning talent like into all these interesting places, I just get excited about that example.
It is interesting that I'm not sure if you saw, every now and then there'll be an advertisement in the New Yorker, and it'll be drawn by a New Yorker cartoonist, because that brand has seen their cartoon and go, boy, wouldn't it be great to get them to do our next, ad. And it's so fascinating to see who they choose with their different styles and their different tone of voice. And some cartoonists, they get approached and they're hooked up through, I think through Condé Nast, but some of them are like, you know what, I really don't resonate with that brand, and I'm not entirely comfortable with being associated with that. And so they say no, and that's fine. And there's no hard feelings. It's a really interesting way to use what is clearly the target audience in that publication. They love cartoons. They're subscribing to the New Yorker. Why not use that? What a fantastic medium to be able to connect to your audience.
I found an example. I'm surrounded by cartoon books, obviously, but one of the things I found that I love is this. I found on eBay is a book that Volkswagen commissioned of New Yorker cartoonists in the 60s, all drawing cartoons related to Volkswagen. When you buy a Volkswagen, like they would give you this at the dealership, which I think is cool. But they got Charles Adams in here, like amazing, like cartoonists drawing cartoons, and so I don't know. I think that's cool. There's a lot we can learn from how cartoons have, worked in the past, back in, when I think it was a different place than it is right now, but I feel like there are a lot of similarities too. Everybody, in a world needing to communicate. There's
I
a lot of
wonder
room
if
for
they all got
cartoonists to do
paid in Volkswagen Beetles for that.
that.
In doing your weekly cartoon for something in the order of what you said, 18, 19 years, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
You would have done close to 1,000 cartoons by now. And
That's right.
in looking through your book, your ad ignored here, it's cartoons from 15 years of marketing, business, and doodling in meetings. It is an interesting journey through for you as a cartoonist, because I noticed that your style changes, your approach to humor changes, your word economy changes, your ability to distill, even in composition. What are the kind of things? Are there any other cartoonists that you took a great deal of inspiration from? I know I can sort of see, I'm kind of peeking at the books on your shelf. I can see some Christoph Niemann and some Patrick
Yeah.
McDonnell, and I think is that Diffie's book back there.
Yeah, I got Diffie's book there. Yeah.
It's interesting to me how influential other cartoonists are on one's style, not just physically drawing, but thinking. Are there any sort of heroes that you have that really influenced you?
Yeah, I do. I've heard it described once, it's like this Frankenstein thing where you sort of, gravitate to certain cartoonists, and then it's kind of, it starts out being this Frankenstein thing where but over time, like the seams sort of disappear and it becomes your own style. Matt Groening was a huge inspiration for me. Like when I found his Life in Hell books in high school, like it just changed, a lot for me. Totally. So that was sort of like one plank. And particularly when I got started, he would often do he did these funny cartoons of different types of school students. And I remember one of my early cartoons was like that, but for brand managers. So there was a bit of that. I came across this French cartoonist, Sampe,
of course.
At one point early on. Wow. And that really made a big impression on me, partly because so many of his cartoons are funny without any words at all.
Yeah.
And so he just has an image and it's just hysterically funny visually. Yeah. And he has really simple line economy. So I started really, playing around with that. But I find I just love cartoons. I love coming across historical cartoons, all the New Yorker cartoons going way back. I love finding historical books and gravitating onto that, all the way through to the current kind of New Yorker cartoonists. That's definitely a key plank in what I look for. And then it's such. It was so great when I went to my first NCS Rubens. I got to meet so many cartoonists who have influenced me. Sergio Aragonés. Just all the way through. Yeah. It's just amazing amazing to get together in one room and just be inspired by it. Yeah. So I don't deliberately. I'm not on a stage where I try not to deliberately copy, but I certainly now I've kind of fallen into my own style. But I love picking up new books and thinking, oh, I love the way this cartoonist did that.
Yeah.
And how do I think about it in my own way, kind of in that direction?
Absolutely.
And that's something I think about over time. But it was part of the fun of doing a book. I think a lot of us have experienced that when you take cartoons that we've drawn 20 years before. It's kind of cool to see how we don't always notice from one cartoon to the next how our style evolves, but over time it does. Yeah. And I have a book here of Gary Trudeau's Yale cartoons, for instance, and you can see the prototype of characters and situations, and then it's cool to see how that turned into what it is today. And so I like, I don't know, it's one of the things I love whenever there's a cartoon exhibit, at the Cartoon Art Museum in San Francisco or other places, whenever you can see the history, but also the the blue line roughs of what led to the cartoons. I love the structure of it. Berkeley Breathitt is another cartoonist, by the way, who was a big influence on me growing up. And I got to meet him right after I quit my job to draw cartooning full time, because he had an exhibit at the Cartoon Art Museum. And that was really cool experience, meeting him and seeing all of his work and how he evolved over time. And I love that, he and, Gary Larson and Berkeley and Bill Watterson were obviously big influences on me as growing up. And it's really cool that Berkeley Breathitt's doing stuff now, and now Gary Larson just published 3 new cartoons last week, so he's back. Pretty amazing.
And he's working digitally, which is a new aspect to his work. He didn't realize how far the technology had evolved since he last tried it, and now he's fallen in love with drawing again, which is such a great thing to hear when a cartoonist who has retired has come out of retirement to work again.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do want to, I know we're coming up towards the end, but there was something a story that you told me about when you were at General Mills and you were sending that first, in the infancy of your mailing list, that first email, and your coworkers, you used the term, I think, prairie dog, prairie dog.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how. I don't know how well known that term is.
Yeah, it's the first time I'd ever heard it, but it was the perfect description of what it was. Do you mind explaining what that was?
Well, I ended up drawing an illustration of this at one point because it was like we were in this cubicle farm, basically. Like, we were all cooped up. Everything looked sort of identical, in the fourth floor of this big skyscraper, and every floor looks exactly the same. And I used to send out my cartoons like during the workday, because it was, it's this hobby thing, and it wasn't officially sanctioned by any means, but people were starting to sign up for it, and I would hit send, and then I described it as prairie dog, and people would like pop their heads up.
It's perfect.
and talk about the cartoon, and often they would talk about like how quick before I was either told not to do it or I was actually fired. So that was the big topic of debate, because particularly my early cartoons, I would often take something out of a meeting I had just heard a few days before, and sometimes I wasn't too subtle about drawing a particular executive who may or may not have been in that meeting. So anyway,
you're very, very brave as a cartoonist doing that within a cubicle farm where people can find you very easily. It's much easier to do it from home.
I know. But oddly though, I then I got a call from the assistant to the chief marketing officer at the company saying the chief marketing officer wanted to have a conversation with me, and I was like, I'm going to get fired. And and all my friends were like, it's done, like you could just back up your files. And but I go to meet him, and actually he ended up I didn't know him well, and I was nervous, and he ended up taking me out to lunch and saying, I really love the cartoons, I love what you're doing, I'd love to support you. And then he ended up introducing me to somebody he went to college with, T. Lewis, who drew Over the Hedge. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And it made me, I feel like sometimes it made me realize sometimes I had my own risk aversion filter, but actually drawing, I feel like it made me realize I never wanted to work in a company again where my cartooning would be a problem. Like I needed to really be who I was. And that was kind of a good moment too.
That's really interesting to sort of make that discovery. I know there's a few more cartoons that we haven't got to yet, and I'd love to go through them just to share them with people, because they're fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you.
The next one this one is I identified with this one very much for two reasons. Did you want to speak the caption there?
Yeah. So a bunch of dogs around a conference table. We need to stay focused on our marketing priorities and not get distracted by every shiny new, look, squirrel.
So there's three parts to this. One is that one of my favorite characters in movies of all time is the dog in Up. The second is that my dog I take him for a walk every morning in the park, and he nearly pulls my arm off when he sees a squirrel. And it's the one thing that will distract him. He could be eating the most delicious meal of his life, and a squirrel goes by and he just is after it. And third of all, I find that I myself am constantly discovering new technologies and things like Twitch and iStream and Zoom and I don't know if you've heard of I'm trying to think of the thing now. It's this online Ethereum marketplace to sell artwork and cartoons. Super Real, I think it's called, Super Real.
Interesting.
There's things popping up all the time, and it's so difficult to stay focused on your existing goals and your existing work when there's all these other potential opportunities, and all anyone is ever saying is, you got to get it on the ground floor, you've got to be first, you've got to be big on Twitter, to be big on Facebook, Instagram, I guess TikTok.
And marketers have making TikTok videos, exactly.
Yeah, and it's so challenging to just remain focused and be able to determine, I really don't think I'm going to get, to use an acronym, just any ROI on all of the time that I'm going to spend on Instagram or building a Facebook following or building a Twitter following. And how is it that you have learned to prioritize this? Because I know that you do sort of expand out to Facebook and Twitter and such. How did you prioritize what you did and most importantly didn't focus on in terms of that?
It's yeah, great question, and some of it comes from laziness. Like I become a technology laggard. Like I think about stuff and I'm like, I kind of need to get involved in that. And some of it, I just I had this. I read a lot of Seth Godin's work, and I remember when social media was bubbling up. And for those who don't know, Seth Godin, he's kind of a marketing luminary, but it's kind of an interesting guy. But he was deliberately not on Twitter for the longest time, and everyone was like, "Why aren't you on Twitter?" And he described it as a distraction. He said what he does, and he's like, again, going back to what do you uniquely do? He would write a small blog post every single day, and he's been doing it now forever.
Yeah.
And it's that he's like, that's the most valuable thing I can do. Mm-hmm. Eventually, he used Twitter to send a link to that. Yeah. But he's like, that's where I want to focus. And so much on my blog and on my newsletter, and then I want to be where social media is. And but I to do it deeply, I knew would be a distraction from the stuff that I could be doing. Yeah. So I struggle with that. I thought about, should I start a podcast? Should I do, what else can I do? And all of those things are right answers for some people, and they could be right for me. But for right now, I find that if I say no to more and I put most of my effort into fewer things, I can be more effective at those fewer things.
So it's sort of an 80, a Pareto principle kind of thing, an 80-20 sort of thing. But I'm going to, you're being modest, but Seth Godin actually called you the David Ogilvy of cartooning. And so that's huge. I mean, Seth is he's a marketing, for lack of a better word, guru, but he also kind of preaches I guess the gospel of find your people, play to them. Don't try, if your customer is everyone, then your customer is no one. Right. And I interestingly enough, Guy Kawasaki also said, that if with regard to your cartoons, he said, laugh and learn at the same time. By the way, if you don't laugh, you're clueless, and the cartoon is about you. That's such a great line. He's Guy Kawasaki is the chief evangelist of Canva, Mercedes-Benz brand ambassador. That's such an interesting process that every cartoonist now, as a freelancer, really, and in charge of their own, I hate to use the term, but they are their own brand. How to stay authentic and stay focused and productive while still trying to maintain some semblance of, trying to keep relevant and go where the audiences are, go where their readers are. And as you say, I guess you eventually ascertain, well, this is the thing that's going to yield the most, for the best bang for my buck as far as time goes. And also, as we spoke about at the very beginning, you're enough. If you're going to spend all your time on social media trying to engage people and all this sort of stuff, then, and it's time away from your family and it's time away from your kids, and it's the things that you actually want to do, which was the reason you even started the business. You sort of think, well, what's the point?
It's hard. And I feel like that's actually a hard thing. I think cartoonists in general struggle with. Like none of us were kids playing with silly putty with the Sunday paper and making, which I used to do. I used to take like Calvin and Hobbes cartoons and put them onto a fresh sheet of paper and like draw in the caption. I never did that, imagining like someday I'm going to build a marketing platform with, for my cartoons and have to deal with clients and how we're going to get paid. Like we get into this because we love the power of cartoons. Like I never want other stuff to get in the way of that, or I should be doing something else and have cartooning back as a hobby. Because ultimately, so that's the balance. I think the struggle is like how to do cartooning in a way that we can be valued and paid for our work, but in a way that doesn't take away from why we got into cartooning to begin with. And I certainly don't have the answers, but I do feel like we are now more. I think every cartoonist does have to have some aspect of what they do that's entrepreneurial, that experiments in different business models, because everybody's, what a business model that might work for, Matthew Inman won't necessarily work for somebody else. And you have to continually experiment, but then find what's right for you and feel confident in when you do say, actually, I don't need to be, on Twitch, for example, or make TikTok videos or whatever. Or if you decide that's actually where I can find my medium and my outlet, that's where I do want to go. going back to Matt Groening, one example I love from his story was with Life in Hell is that he started like putting his cartoon in alternative newspapers, and then thought he then started self-syndicating to other alternative papers, and he ended up building a separate company that was a syndicate of alternative cartoons for alternative papers with other cartoonists that he carried in that syndicate.
Yeah.
And I love that example because he was thinking entrepreneurially about where his cartoons would go, and then that led to other thinking about other business opportunity for other cartoonists.
Yeah.
That's that example I hold to heart, because I'm like, I want to do that. I want to be entrepreneurial in a way that can ultimately get my cartoons out into the world more. So how I think about it.
Yeah. And what you've done is you've created opportunities for other cartoonists, which is fantastic.
Yes.
One key question, and I promise this is my last big question,
No,
because I do
please.
want to see the rest of your cartoons before we go. With the transition from print to digital, from going from the page to the screen, there is a difficult mental hurdle that many people are, I guess, paying clients are grappling with, including newspaper editors and online blog editors, and it's that why should they pay the same amount that they paid in print for something that's going to appear online? There seems to be this misrepresentation that we are constantly battling with, that just because it's appearing online, that it should be paid any less than if it appeared in print. Can you speak to that a bit as far as your experience with it and getting paid what you are worth and asking what you are worth?
Yeah, it's hard.
That's why I left it till the end.
Yeah, there's not an easy answer for that, except going back to what you uniquely do. That I feel like if the cartoons are interchangeable, like I feel like I look at the Wall Street Journal, for instance, and they have the little back panel where there's a spot for a cartoon, and it's small, and there's nothing wrong with that spot. It's just that at that resolution, it is a little bit more commoditized a little bit.
Yeah.
And if you're in that environment, then and take that to print or take that to online, like retailers that treat it like a commodity, then you don't have a lot of power to say that you're worth more, because the power is with that.
Yeah.
But if it's something that you can create, something that's wholly your own, then I think you have the ability to say, well, you're reaching this many people, and the cartoons I'm creating have value for that many people.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of Wendy McNaughton. Do you know her work at all?
Yep.
I love what she does, and she really thinks about illustration and cartooning in the world of like newspaper reporting or journalism, graphic journalism, effectively. The New York Times sent her to Guantanamo Bay to do a graphic journalism piece on Guantanamo Bay. And she's created like her whole, thing. Like she had a full page in the New York Times that was a whole journalist story told through the graphic medium. And I know now the New York Times is taking it other places, but that's an example where you're doing something new.
Yes.
And when you do something new, you don't have the price thresholds where they're saying, well, I paid the last time I had a cartoon to plug into my little spot is worth this. Suddenly it's something new that's wholly your own.
That's very
and
interesting.
You can say, what is it worth to you, rather than trying to go, how much is it going to cost me?
Yeah.
So the value is like, how do you have the conversation differently? And so, I've had my cartoons in this marketing trade magazine in the UK called Marketing Week now for 12, 13, 14 years. They had no idea what cartoons would be because they had never done that before. So I structured it more about like, what's the value that I can bring?
Yeah.
And then I continually try to think beyond that. So they have been carrying my cartoons weekly for that many years. But then also, like, they called me up and said, we have this event, how do we do something cool for this event? And we ended up doing this really cool thing where I drew a cartoon without words. I turned it into a paint by numbers thing, and everybody at the event could come in and like color in a piece of the cartoon. And then they were like, we have so many pieces. Do you know that there's a Guinness World Record for the most color by numbers done over a period of time? I was like, no. So they ended up, the Guinness World Record showed up at the event and like gave them a Guinness World Record for the most contributions to a color by numbers.
That's amazing.
It was a really cool event, but it was actually like a cartoon I'd drawn and blew up, and like, so that was like an example of how if that's something, there's no price comparison in the Graphic Artists Guild.
Right.
And so I feel like the key to getting paid more for what we do is to try to create a new definition of what we do that's different than how it's treated like a commodity, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
That's just my view.
That's the best answer to that question I've ever had, because it's a question I ask of every cartoonist I speak with. And that's the value proposition. That's a fantastic way to approach it. And especially considering the new mediums and the way that cartoons are being used in sort of graphic memoir and journalism, graphic journalism, the things that the Nib are doing. And, there's so many different ways to use cartoons that we can sort of retool and think, well, that's a new thing, and how to appreciate the value of it rather than just looking at the cost of it based on a 20th century model. That's so interesting.
Yeah, but the downside of where we are in cartooning is that the syndicates and there's not a magazine market like there used to be. All these things that used to be the establishment business models aren't working the way they used to work. Right. That's the downside. The upside is that there's all this new opportunity in that if you can find an angle that, again, applying what you uniquely do to that opportunity, you can create something new that hasn't been done before. And that's the exciting sort of flip side of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to go through the final cartoons that we have here, and then we will sadly have to say goodbye. I could talk to you forever on this stuff, but we have a time limit. So what, did you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah, so there's a couple in the living room, and there's sort of a peeping Tom head through the window, and the woman saying, don't worry, it's only marketers collecting our personal data so they can create more relevant advertising for us.
That's great. It's the final frontier in algorithms.
It is, and since I've drawn this cartoon, I feel like that's even before Alexa. Like now, he's literally in the room listening.
Yeah, it's the thing on the coffee table there that's listening now.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And then careful, the last content was full of marketing.
I love this cartoon. This is on the back of your book as well. This one, I always love a Trojan horse cartoon. Anytime there's a Trojan horse cartoon, there's always so many new ways to do it. This is the perfect, and everyone can relate to this one.
Thank you.
So I wanted to thank you for your time, but also for all of the resources. I will direct everyone and insist that everyone goes to marketunist.com to see your fabulous work, but also to grab the book because your ad ignored here, which is available through your website and through Amazon, is one of the great sort of niche cartoon collections, and also it's kind of captured the zeitgeist of each of the time that it's been done in, and the language that's been used. You can recognize some of the marketing sort of techniques that have since become dated or ineffective, and the ones that still the most striking thing about reading it over it's a 15 years worth of cartoons is the things that are still intensely relevant and identifiable now, which is great for a cartoon to have that kind of immediate recognition now is fantastic. It's a testament to the writing of the cartoon.
Thank you.
So Tom, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. And as I mentioned, if you want to see more of Tom's work or get in touch with him, it's marketunist.com. Thank you very much, Tom, and please stay safe there in California.
Thank you so much. So great to talk with you.
All right. See ya.